I'm going to talk about Streamtime, the future and the battle for the soul of project management, which is a big title. And as part of this project, I was asked to look particularly about what the future of Streamtime could look like. And the idea of, I guess, project management software and running a professional services business has been something in my mind for the last eight or 9 years. I used to run Interbrand in Australia as CEO, and so I had to look at lots of different types of software to help run my business, whether it was financial management software, project management software, timesheet software, etc. And I was never a big fan of any of that. And so it was a really interesting project to actually start to think about, well, if I could have my choice rather than the IT department choosing for me, what would happen? And so some of this is, I guess, a projection about what potentially could Streamtime be. I do have to apologise that because this is about the future, this is quite an abstract presentation. I'll try to land a few things as best I can. Andy will do a much better job of landing some of the more specific things that we're working on. So his presentation will be significantly better than my one. As Aaron said, he asked me to remind you, take notes, ask questions. Please stop me as I go if you do have any questions, because as I said, some of this is abstract, and I've kind of lived with this for a while, so I make a lot of assumptions, I guess, as I move along. So if you do get confused, please stop me. So I guess just to set the scene, and there's just a few setups in terms of how I think about what the future can look like, and I think about it in the context of not only Streamtime but the business world. And as someone who needs to use this software, what does the future look like for running I guess a business of our size, but also, not just 14, 15 people, but 20, 30, 40 people, different categories, etc. And there's a very substantial amount of change that's happening in our business world that helps set the context for, I guess, what future choices in software could be like. And I think that's an incredibly important element to this. So the first thing that I wanted to just cover off is the one about numbers. And I'm not a huge fan of numbers at the best of times. And I actually think we need to change our relationship with numbers, because even though I personally don't like numbers, and I think a lot of people in the creative industry struggle with it, and they often, even something as simple as doing timesheets is often a battle. And numbers make us do really strange things. And that context is something we need to be very clear about, is that even though numbers help us with things, the majority of people in creative industries and other industries actually don't like working with them. They don't understand them fully. They don't understand some of the metrics that we deal with. And so I think we have to recognise that rather than just simply saying we have to put up with this is the way it's always been. Because I think any organisation in the future that can actually go, no, it's not as it's always been, this is how it could be, will ultimately win. And it should be for Streamtime to actually do that. So firstly, I think numbers are a relatively soulless type thing. You look at them and they're fairly cold. And I know even management consultants struggle once they analyse stuff, that they mistake people for numbers and they get a whole bunch of things wrong as a consequence of that. So I think it's important that we actually think about how numbers can actually illuminate, I guess, our day jobs, as opposed to simply being something that we have to work hard at analysing. They make us lie, and I think anybody who's seen a timesheet that for months on end people put in 7.5 hours, on that know that all the people that do that are just lying through their teeth. And the consequence of that is that the data isn't accurate. And I think that's when it comes down to my other point about, even when we know the numbers are inaccurate, we still think they're better than no numbers. And to me, that's a dysfunctional thing. And I would say most industries are perfectly happy to have the wrong numbers, but at least they got numbers, they're okay, which I think is absolutely insane. It's crazy. Numbers alienate us, because I think if we don't relate to them well, we kind of rather not deal with them. And I know time and time again, dealing with a chief financial officer and trying to explain JCRs to them and all that kind of stuff, and very, very confusing. And I think numbers at the end of the day make us do weird shit. Time and time again, I've seen project managers stand over designers and go, you will only put in this amount of time, won't you? As opposed to accurate reporting. And that's because you don't want the job to go over, because that will get pinged upstairs and then they'll come down and ask lots of really uncomfortable questions. And so there's a whole range of dysfunction that happens with numbers that we need to consider in the real life usage. And how do we actually overcome that? The second area is the fact that I think technology at work sucks really badly. And time again, I've seen either with clients or within businesses that I've worked in is the CIO or the CTO often basically says, well, it kind of is, but that's what you just got to put up with. That's the lot of business software. I think there are a number of things that I think we can do a hell of a lot better with. Firstly, I actually think most of the technology I use in my personal life has been better than historically the kind of software that I've used at work. And that's kind of sad, is that, you know, I've worked for multi-billion-dollar corporations that should be able to afford proper software. And, you know, my own home is better kitted out, which is crazy. And so I think you know, people have gotten used to dealing with mediocre software, and I don't think that's good enough for business. Secondly, I think when I look back through the history of software design versus industrial design, software design only sort of started seriously in about 1968 in terms of interface design. It started in about 46 for software design proper, but that's not very long ago. So its history is only fairly short, whereas industrial design was sort of emerged as a discipline in the early 20th century. And so it's had a little bit more time, but I would like that we not wait 100 years to actually get software, particularly for business, up to a grade that is actually fun to use and aesthetically pleasing and easy to actually find what you want and to be intuitive and all those wonderful things that you often see more so in consumer-based software than you do in necessarily business software. And I think often because so much business software has to fit so many features in and it has to make so many compromises, usually the users have to work hard to make the software work for them. And that's crazy, because the whole point of software is to automate all those things rather than actually make people dig in deep. I was working with a company called Integrated Research a couple of years ago, and they were showing me how their tool allegedly sort of helped clients to better see problems that were happening in their internal communication systems. But when they actually showed me how it worked, you had to go down and down and down into layers before you could actually find where the answer was, which is just nuts. I mean, why don't you elevate that sort of stuff? And I think, again, if we're able to trump, I guess, the way that I think the most people think about software development, I think we're onto a bit of a winner. And then lastly, I think the whole world of feature creep is not helping. Like, there are so many features that go into software that nobody uses, and you have to make so many compromises with the design of the software. You ultimately produce something that's a bit of a Frankenstein and not very friendly to use. So again, like why don't we start to get disciplined around what are the real things that we need and not enter into that arms race that really doesn't help anybody. And then lastly, and I won't go through all the detail in this, but the reality is the future of work is changing. And we need to be able to accommodate this. Like in the creative industries, they are transforming radically. They have no choice, because so much of what they do is commoditizing. The expectations from clients is changing rapidly. The pace at which people have to work, the more efficient that they have to work, is hugely changing the nature of the kind of information they have to get, the pace at which they have to get. The fact that culture is becoming a far more dominant theme in how in terms of being the operating system of a business, and being able to measure the nature of a culture is becoming important. Automation, wherever automation can happen, is key. Things are becoming far more volatile, and so project management is needing to be more dynamic. Now, all of these things influence the kind of software that's going to be useful. And I would argue that the vast majority of project management software is backward-looking and slow in terms of provision of data. And again, these things need to be changed so that we can actually capture, I guess, the new way of working that's going to be an expectation of business as usual in the future for clients. When I was thinking about all this stuff, a quote kept coming to me all the time, and it might seem a little bit of a stretch, but it does relate to the actual start of this presentation. And it was a quote from Woody Allen from Annie Hall. I was thrown out of college for cheating on the metaphysics exam. I looked into the soul of the boy sitting next to me. And I loved Annie Hall, but I actually think this is a really wonderful quote, because I think what we're talking about here is a change, is that we're not simply looking at numbers as an inhuman thing. We're not simply looking at people as being resources. We're actually looking into the soul of a project, and the thing that matters most in the project are the people that are working around it, that are working together every day of the week to deliver something that's powerful. Or unsuccessful, depending on how things are managed. And to me, if we can have software that is essentially able to look into the soul of that team and be able to provide them with what they need to actually do their projects properly, and to make them better, more competitive, more creative, more effective, that's the kind of stuff that I would hope people pay decent money for. And so what are some of the things that we want to do if we're going to look into the soul of a project? Firstly, I think as a principle, we should think that the past is past. We shouldn't simply be producing data that is historical, and then time and time again I was in meetings with project managers who would just go, there's not much we can do about this project, it's gone off the ball right now, and we can't really do anything now for the next 2 weeks, we're just going to lose money on it. Bad luck. I don't think that's a good enough condition to be in. So the tools need to be able to contribute to our understanding of the future, and I'll explain how that works a little bit later. Most metrics only speak when spoken to, so you've got to go and look for them. They don't actually go, hey, I can see 2 or 3 things that are going wrong here right now, you should be looking at them. And so you have to wait till you get your reports run, and then you start to play through this stuff and go, okay, well, yeah, there's something that's an issue. Often that's too late. So I think data needs to be an active participant in the direction of the project as opposed to being passive, because usually passive is too late. Also, most of the measures focus on time, money and resources, actually not the state of the humans. Most projects fail because of the state of the people. So their mental, the way they think about things, how they feel, their morale, whether they like the client or they absolutely hate them, whether the brief is crap, whether they have to work on this thing anyway because they're made to. All of those things actually substantial impact on projects in terms of profitability, whether people hang around, whether they actually want to give the time on the job, or whether they want to run off and do something else, or whether they want to procrastinate and slow the job down. All of those things are the real things that actually affect a lot of industry. So we want to have a look at the individuals and the teams that actually have that kind of impact. And I think lastly, we kind of, in a lot of the resource management stuff, we treat humans as fungible resources, which basically means they're just perfectly substitutable with other humans, which is just nonsensical. You know, people have different skills, people have different speeds of doing things, they can see things differently, they have different experiences they can bring to projects. Yet we often as a team, when we're working, we hold that in our heads, but what if software could actually understand that better, and what kind of improvement could that provide? So again, how do we account for specific skills of individuals? How do we factor that into the decision-making processes of software? And so this all sounds like very, you know, future-orientated and science fiction-y, but there are some simple starting points that we can start to look at in how we might make that work, and that's kind of the second part of what we're talking about. And whilst, you know, this looks like a fair way off, we can already see that there's change coming, whether it's things like Slack, which I think is a really wonderful tool in terms of its simplicity and its focus and its design for real people, is a really good example, and its success is a clear measure of that. And at the other extreme, something like Watson, which is starting the process of artificial intelligence actually providing very, very substantial change in the way that we automate the work that we do, and the ability for machines to be able to think bigger and faster than humans and to be useful from that point of view so we can make better decisions. And obviously we're not producing a Watson, but certainly there are some things that we can learn from the expectations that the marketplace will have of software for the future. And so what if we integrated some of this thinking into Streamtime, and we conducted a series of sort of thought experiments on how that could play out? So I'm going to talk about 3 of them briefly. The first one is the idea of future-based project management. The second is how do we introduce culture management into what we do, and then the idea of personal data. And all of those are interlinked. They all relate to one another and provide data to each other in particular ways. And I think in combination it can start to produce some quite interesting things. So the first one around future-based project management. So it's how do we sort of avoid just the historical stuff, but actually look into the future. And I think when you look at project management, what it really is, it's a battle for the future. So every time somebody writes an estimate, what they're doing is predicting what the future should be in terms of their expectations. And what happens between now and that future is that a whole bunch of things are going to happen that they're going to hopefully try to predict, but typically can't predict everything. And so it's a process of entropy that starts to destroy that perfect sort of expectation that you have. And now, you know, we've had to kind of, you know, battle our way through that. But what if software could actually help provide and inform us of data on a day-by-day basis of stuff saying you're getting closer or further away from your goal of actually seeing that future, and providing information that helps you to understand how you get to that future better. And so the shift we're talking about is traditional, I guess, project management software and the data that comes back is diagnostic in nature. The shift that we're talking about is prognostic. It's where, you know, future project management tools are continually reinforcing. They're evaluating the variables that are supporting or weakening a project's likelihood of success and providing options for improvement. And so what kind of things could that play out as? Well, I think there are three areas that are particularly interesting, I guess, in the first cut of things that we looked at. Some of them already exist in information that you already get, and which is okay, but we can actually reframe that information to look at the future rather than saying this is what I've done. And that's things like time and budget, margin profitability around projects, utilisation, multiples, and all those classic sort of project management things. But there are some other things. The first one is, whilst we do talk about capacity and we talk about people, we talk about them as bodies. As opposed to real humans. When I think about capacity, capacity is people's headspace to do a project well, not just simply their time available. And do they have the skill or the capability around that capacity to do it? Because some people will do it faster. We know a creative director will probably crack a job a lot faster than a junior. Now we kind of know that, but there are also other more subtle skill sets that we need to consider as well. And at the far end is something like called clearance, which we often don't focus a lot on, but I think is going to become more and more important. Is the ability to be able to just get stuff done. How fast can we complete things? You know, how do we actually realise cash faster in terms of cash flows, not simply profitability on a project? How do we shut a project down quickly and then move on to the next one and allow us to be able to, I guess, keep up to date with the pace of change of things? And then what is the right composition of team? You know, can our software actually analyse different groups of teams working together over time to go, actually, these are the best possible combinations that we can have? That's all useful for actually understanding how projects can work better. The second is around the area of culture management. And with culture management, there's, I guess, a growing body of communication, documents, research, study, etc., to say more and more that we've left culture on the table for too long. There's more and more organisations that are using culture as their operating system and is fundamental to the way a business delivers. And it's often the how of the business, like how they actually deliver their service, which is as important as the end deliverable for clients. And so it's a fundamental piece that I think we can certainly build in some capabilities. Now, when I think about culture, I think purely within the context of a project. I'm not thinking about the entire building an employee engagement system for Streamtime. And there are already plenty of employee engagement methodologies, whether it's employee NPS, which is using the traditional Net Promoter Score, but inside there's the little things called, Job Vibe or Nico. Nico is another one that actually allows you day by day to actually evaluate how teams feel. And then there's the full-scale employee engagement battery of hundreds of questions that people hate doing, and it takes forever to get data back. And like at Interbrand, we used to do those, unfortunately, and it would take nearly 12 months to get the data back, and you're like, I fixed that problem 9 months ago, which is crap. So how do we inbuilt a system into the life of a project, maybe at the beginning and the end of a project, to actually understand how are people feeling at the start and how are people feeling at the end of this, and how do we create a fairly simple way of actually evaluating this stuff? Because I know that often really crappy projects, the morale and the way people think about it, you see it in how they respond, and it tends to show up in the money at the end of the day as well. So I started to dig around, and there's a lady called Mary Williams who looks at project management and automation, and there were some really interesting things that she looked at, and I've kind of adapted some of her thinking around. One of the most important things for an employee when they're working on a project at the end of the day is not all the nice things that you might get sort of at work, whether it's, it might be meals during the day you get given, or you might have, the opportunity to have an early, a Friday off early, and all those kind of nice things that companies obsess about. At the end of the day, most people stay and leave on the basis of, can I get my job done and do I feel any satisfaction for it? That is the largest single contributor whether people stay, above and beyond obviously things like pay. And so Mary Williams looked at that, and there were a number of things that she felt were most important to evaluate. Firstly, what is my purpose? Do I know what I'm doing? Does my team know what they're doing? And I know time and time again, when projects go badly, often people in the team go, I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to be doing here. Like, the brief's not clear, nobody's asked the right questions. And that's a big contributor to project failure. Secondly is autonomy. Do I have the freedom to do the things I need to do to get my job done, or are there things getting in the way of me achieving that? The third one is this idea of mastery. Am I in command of what I need to do, and can I do the job well as a consequence of that? And that's a really high reader in terms of job satisfaction. And then the last one is relationship. How productive is my relationship with the rest of my team and my client? Now, I know that at Interbrand, more often than not, when people were walking out the door, was quite often people would say, look, I just can't work on Telstra. I've had 2 years of it, I don't think I'll ever see the end of it, I can't stay here anymore. And so, you know, it could be something like that that's the thing that's like, I just can't deal with that anymore. Or I can't work with this person anymore, it's just not working out. And you try to do something about it. So those 4 measures, if we're able to build those in terms of an engagement metric, I think we'd be a long way in terms of understanding the kind of read on how people feel, being able to cross-correlate that with financial data and start to see sort of a much better way of managing teams. You can add into that things like cultural characteristics of a particular organisation, because normally those kind of things are becoming more and more defined as metrics as well. But certainly this is an interesting starting point for actually developing measures into Streamtime around things like purpose, autonomy, mastery and relationship. And the last thing is around the idea of personal data. I think most software is built around what the organisation needs and not necessarily around, well, I've got a career here as an individual, what am I getting out of it and what more can I get from it? Because you obviously conduct a whole range of projects and you build skills out of that, and you sometimes get awards for doing that work, or you might work with interesting people who have a very high profile and you'd like to be able to tell the world about that. You want to be able to transfer some of that data, appropriate data, obviously not secure information. And on top of that, I guess there's that, and I don't expect you to be able to read all of that, is the fact that there's an obsession with sort of quantified sort of data for people. And this was from a study that was done by RGA, but I was kind of interested to see all the different things that people were kind of quantifying themselves around, including in bed. Spreadsheets is a piece of software that quantifies your sex life, and Glow measures your fertility cycles. So, I mean, we're getting into some sort of pretty specific personal stuff in this kind of thing. Brushing your teeth, taking breaks, all that kind of stuff. So people are wanting to know more about themselves in a quantified way and to understand how can I improve my performance, and why wouldn't you want to do that for your own work life? And so, on top of that, we have the fact that more freelancers and contractors are becoming a day-to-day reality. And a number of studies I dug out, the statistics were very similar. Typically, sort of in the next 5 years, a 30 to 40% increase in freelancers in organisations and contractors within Australia and the US. The data was pretty much the same. And so that's going to only continue. And so if you've got people sort of more freewheeling, that data needs to be far more transferable. And so what are some of the roles that personal data can play? Because I think it's as much for the organisation as it is the individual as well. Firstly, for performance contribution and improvement, so that you can see the performance of individuals and you can capture that data. We can have a look at project and culture and skill fit if we have that kind of data and it is transferable. You know, freelancers you often bring in, and I know, you know, working sort of in various agencies over the years, often the freelancers are gone by midday because you've found that you've hired someone who's crap. And so having more data around them would be a better thing. It's a good record of credentials and real credentials. It's potentially for employees shareable and transferable. But also the ability to be able to improve that data should be an incentive and a reward. And to be able to show that and to be able to demonstrate that is key. So we looked at a whole bunch of different things, whether it's, you know, how do you visually represent data, and obviously sort of, you know, a whole bunch of companies, including Apple's looking at that. LinkedIn's done a reasonable job of actually sort of building out skill sets and endorsements, and I think those are potentially quite powerful for some people. What happens if we could integrate with them, or they would allow us to integrate with them to actually add on to that? And to be able to introduce that kind of data back into the business. You can borrow from role-playing games and other computer games that actually provide lots of data on your personal skill sets in how you play games and the characters you play. Is there a way of adapting that? And lastly, reward systems. We know that Mozilla already has a badges program that has about 250,000 verified badges already. It's an open source sort of initiative, so we can certainly build off that as well as a way of rewarding people. And so there's a whole range of things, and just as simple as I can make it, way of capturing data, there are 3 levels that we can start to look at and potentially build into Streamtime. Firstly, the metrics that we need to capture data, so the skills of the person, the role attributes, granular specific achievements that people could make within the life of a project, and the kind of cultural attributes that they start to build up. So that's the kind of raw data that we can start to capture on people. And then from that we can start to create, on the basis of these behaviours being achieved, reward generation. So, and some of these rewards may be generated by your own team members, or they could be actually generated just simply through the data that's been captured and the software going, actually, you've ticked the boxes on these sort of things, so there's particular rewards that can be achieved. And ultimately, you can start to build out a whole bunch of personal data, and that can sit on the system, but or you can also take that with you when you go to your next job. And hopefully, you know, LinkedIn will play nice and we can actually do something with them. You can be a little bit more playful. You could introduce avatars, the badges could build up on there. I mean, there's a whole way of actually producing a whole range of activities. We even thought about, you know, whether the avatar would actually change in character based on the engagement metrics that you put in on the day of the week or not. And if it was feeling grumpy, it'd be a good way of reflecting actually your state of mind. I'm not sure whether you want to be that transparent, but that's certainly some of the things that you could potentially do. So there are a whole range of things that we can play around with in terms of how we make all of this work. So I guess those are some of the thought experiments that we look towards as a starting point. We have to build out these and start to get sensible about how they might really work. And, you know, I think when I was talking to Aaron, you know, he made the point, you know, is this Streamtime's future or just pie in the sky? Because a lot of it is sort of not fully considered. It is still quite abstract, but I think if you break it down into those elements, all of them are achievable to a certain degree. There are some things that we've been working with the Streamtime team already on, not specifically about this. This would be next stage work, but certainly things we thought about was how do we kill timesheets? People hate doing them, so how do you blow them up? What's a better alternative? How do we automate things so people don't have to get involved in that sort of work? There's a whole range of closer in activities that we've done to start this process, and that will be really the job of Andy to start to talk about shortly. So that's it for me. I don't know whether people have any questions, challenges they want to talk about before I hand over.
That was awesome.